Hello all, today we're going to be unpacking society's biggest issues, at least according to Reddit, and we're going to be ranking them on a scale of 1 to 5. Broken attention span and the behaviour of teens and children acting like buffoons and douchebags. So this is highlighting the issue of social media and other technologies which seem to be impacting our psychology or our behaviour in a way that seems to be unpleasant or at least not useful. So the way that media seems to be moving is that everything's becoming quicker, where we become obsessed with the speed of things, we just want information non-stop, and that manifests in things like YouTube Shorts, which this may be on, and TikTok and Instagram Reels and things of that nature, and they seem to be contributing to the deficit of people's attention span, at least regarding their ability to focus on more traditional media items, things like reading, writing, or even watching films. This has been accompanied by certain editing norms which have been associated with the term brain rot, where you sort of have this fast-paced editing. Now this is causing shorter attention spans because our brains are constantly craving that sort of dopamine and explosive colours and sounds and whatnot. So it's important to note here that when we talk about attention spans, that's actually quite a vague term, it's quite broad. So our attention span, it's kind of hard to say that as a whole it's decreasing or increasing because, well, your attention span differs based on whatever object you're trying to focus on or that you're working with. Attention span on two different media items might be different, so it's kind of hard to make the conclusion that collectively our attention spans have got shorter. Regardless, as stated earlier, it's clear that social media is having some sort of effect on people's ability to focus on more traditional things. So one 2019 paper describes internet addiction as a disorder in which an individual's inability to control his or her use of the internet causes marked distress and/or functional impairment, and that further creates psychological, social, school and/or work difficulties. And so don't immediately diagnose yourself with a social media addiction or internet addiction because these things are pretty new and they require a lot more research before we can make a sort of substantive claim like that. But ultimately, it does seem that these behaviours are manifesting mostly in younger people and they tend to lack the most self-control, and that's why. All in all, I think this is a pretty major issue, and as a Gen Z, I definitely feel the impact of it. So I will give this I think I'm just going to give it a 3 out of 5. And that 1 to 5 scale is kind of based off 1 being not very significant in society and 5 being very significant. Constant disinformation, literally constant. It's impossible to know what's true. Everything is so politicized as well. So I think information has always been politicized. That being said, I think we are moving towards a more chaotic landscape of facts and claims being constructed and thrown around. Nowadays, there's just so much access to different narratives and belief systems that it seems so difficult to be able to reasonably put them together and make a decision. So now there's just so much information out there that it seems almost possible to doubt anything that's ever said. Whereas prior to social media, one may not have been exposed to these opposing viewpoints or critiques in the first place. So to kind of concrete that in an example, you might have a certain political group that have a magnifying glass on a certain news outlet that have opposing views. And as soon as that news outlet is ready to release some information, that political group will pounce and try and manufacture as much doubt as possible. And this has the effect of diminishing the reputation of that news outlet. And then through that, other members of the public will become more exposed to certain weaknesses that they may have not otherwise seen. And then this creates a sphere of distrust around everything. Every news outlet, every political group, there's just so much competition that people are, tearing down reputations of each other. In other words, it's a bit of a data deluge. There's just so much information and disinformation out there. It's like, how do you make the right decision with the good information? I think this is a huge problem. I will give this a 4 out of 5 regarding significance. Loneliness is a silent killer and rots our culture. So loneliness can often be trivialized, but it can have a significant effect on our health. In fact, it's correlated with one's risk of premature mortality, and at the same time, loneliness rates have significantly increased, at least in the past decade. It's effectively becoming a public health problem. So loneliness has also been seen to correlate with personality disorders, suicide rates, cognitive decline, risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, and a lot of other things. It can also impact sleep, and that in turn has a big impact on other health aspects. So one issue of loneliness is that it's often associated with being alone, or being introverted or lacking social skills, but oftentimes people can feel socially isolated despite being around other people. And so there have been positive effects of trying to develop a lonely person's social skills and trying to encourage them in engaging in more social interactions, but it seems like the problem can even be more complex than that. I do think this is a very significant issue. I will also give this I'll give it a 4 out of 5. Not wanting to improve your life and just accepting you can't get healthy when you actually can. Okay, so this is an interesting one. There's a sort of mantra on social media that's going around where, if you're not healthy, if you're not doing well in life, then it's your own fault and you need to do better and you need to develop your skills, work hard because everyone else can work hard and do well. And essentially you're capable of doing that too, and you should be doing that. So is that an issue? Are people being lazy nowadays? It's complicated. So the effect of social media is that you have worldwide coverage of different individuals in different parts of the world, and they present to you the idyllic form of life. These depictions sort of build a fantasy of unobtainable expectations for you to try and strive towards. And when you compare yourself to these depictions, you can just often feel stuck because you're so far away from the ideal. There's just so much you need to do in order to get there. It's like, where do I even start? I think there certainly can be some benefit to, getting people to work hard and trying to advertise the hard-working lifestyle. But at the end of the day, there's just such unobtainable goals that people can often feel stuck when trying to make a start and strive towards them, get out of their rut, whatever sort of lifestyle they want to have that they want to change. And so a lot of literature tends to highlight the importance of setting small instrumental goals on your way to try and obtaining that end of the line goal. And then as you start achieving these smaller goals, you work towards your bigger ones, and then that can normally help. Although this does come with some caveats. When you're setting those small goals on your way to the big goal, there can often be this feeling that, there should be a linear progression towards that goal because you're ticking off your smaller goals and you're on your way to the bigger one. But that often isn't the case. So you almost need to preempt that, it's not going to be a linear progression to that end goal. And ultimately, as much as I can appreciate this mantra of working hard and, getting yourself out of your rut and, working hard because other people have worked so hard and look at what they've achieved, so look at what you can achieve. At the end of the day, there's just so much external and random variables that can impact you on a day-to-day basis. I think it can sometimes be a fallacy when successful people say, hey, I came from a bad background, look at what I accomplished. It's just so hard to compare two different lifestyles, which has two different environments and two different personalities. Ultimately, I think there needs to be a degree of humility when people have reached such successes because, at the end of the day, what exactly are you taking credit for? The idea of having a good mentality and good behavior is positive, but at the end of the day, they're just affected by so many other things. And so that kind of leaves us in the middle where we want to tell people to work hard. There's so much out of your control. It's like, well, what do you do? Essentially, not wanting to improve your life and just accepting you can't get healthy when you actually can. It's a pretty significant issue, although I don't know if it's talked about and communicated the best on social media. So I would give it a solid 4 out of 5 regarding its significance. Okay, the next significant issue in society is aging population in first world at least. Okay, so according to some epidemiological studies, 11% of the world's population is above 60, and by 2050, that number will rise to 22%. Well, why is this an issue? Well, you can break it down into health challenges and economic challenges. So older people tend to be more at risk for picking up diseases and developing disabilities. And on the economic side, well, to put it bluntly, you will essentially have less people producing resources and more people using them. So traditionally, societies have tended to have systems of intergenerational reciprocity. So what that means is that if you can imagine when you're a child, you can't fend for yourself, so adults tend to produce resources and enable children to live without having to work. And then when those adults get older and the children grow up, that's sort of reciprocated, where now the children who have grown into healthy adults can provide resources to support older people who aren't as efficient at producing resources. And this works on a family and individual scale all the way to the society level, right? So if you can imagine within your family, you might have a system where you tend to care for your parents as they get older, and your parents have cared for you when you were younger. And then on society as a whole, you have the working population who produce resources and tend to subsidize support systems that can help elderly people. And that manifests in things like retirement schemes and pension schemes that enable older people to still have an income despite not being able to work. The issue now is that this balance seems to be offsetting, where there is going to be a higher number of people who are retired and a proportionally lower number of people who are working. So this is an issue mainly in developed countries. Japan tends to be highlighted a lot for this. And there are two popular ways that this issue tends to be dealt with. So number one, you could increase retirement age, and that enables you to have more people working and less people that are not working and still using resources. But then that sort of ends in all other negative consequences. Now, alternatively, you may import workers from other countries so that your working population is still large enough to develop resources for the non-working population. And now this has been pretty common in places like the UK, the US, and other European countries and North American countries. But this is quite new for countries like China and Japan. So if they were to adopt this could lead to all sorts of other issues with a high number of immigrants coming into the country. Regardless, it seems like either of these remedies won't last forever, and this is a pretty significant issue that we're going to have to confront with a difference in a different sort of way. Essentially, I think this is a pretty significant issue, but I can imagine a world where we find ways to make these processes of making resources and certain products more efficient, and that can enable us to provide for more non-working people. So I'm going to give this a solid 3 out of 5. Okay, well, that's the end of the video. If you made it this far, I'd really appreciate it. If you have any ideas for how I can improve, I'd really appreciate hearing them. But bye for now.